The first thing I remember is the sound of my own front door being forced open while I was still holding a teacup in my hand. Not a knock, not a warning. Just wood slamming against the wall and boots on my floor. And behind them, my son. Calm. Composed. Watching me like I was already gone. He told them I was a danger to myself. Said I'd been confused, unstable, talking about things that didn't exist. I stood there, 70 years old, in my own kitchen, trying to understand how my life had just been rewritten without me. They didn't ask much. Not really. Just enough to make it look proper. I tried to explain. I told them there had to be some mistake, that my son was upset because I refused to sign something earlier that morning. Papers. Rushed ones. He said it was urgent. I said I needed time. That's all it was. Time. But suddenly, that refusal had turned into paranoia, into risk, into a reason to take me out of my own house, like I was something fragile and dangerous at the same time. Victor didn't raise his voice once. That was the part that stayed with me. He stood slightly behind them, hands in his coat pockets, like he was attending a quiet event he couldn't leave early. When our eyes met, I waited for something. Hesitation, guilt, anything. But there was nothing there. Just calculation. Cold, steady calculation. They told me to come with them. Just for evaluation, one of them said, like it was a routine check, like I'd be back before dinner. I looked around my kitchen, at the small ceramic jar of saffron I had opened earlier, at the half-cut lemon on the counter, at the chair where Victor had been sitting an hour before, pushing those papers toward me again and again. Just sign, Mom. It's simple. Simple. I asked if I could at least get my coat. One of them nodded. Another followed me down the hallway like I might disappear into the wallpaper. When I passed my study, I noticed the drawer where I kept my documents was slightly open. I hadn't left it that way. I knew I hadn't. Outside, the air was colder than I expected. Neighbors were watching. Curtains moved. Doors cracked open just enough. I wanted to say something. To someone. But what do you say when the story's already been decided for you? As they guided me into the car, I looked back one last time. Victor was standing in the doorway now. Not worried, not rushed. Waiting. That's when I understood something wasn't wrong with me. Something was very, very wrong with him. Hello, my dears. I'm Grace. And I have to say, when your own child stands there like that, calm while your life is taken apart piece by piece, it chills you to the bone. Tell me, would you have trusted him in that moment? Or already felt something was off? Let's talk in the comments. The hospital didn't smell like illness. It smelled like something cleaner than that. Something erased. They took my name first, then my belongings, then my phone. One by one, the small proofs of my life disappeared into plastic trays and locked drawers. I kept waiting for someone to realize there had been a mistake, that someone would look at me, not the chart, not the report, and see a woman who knew exactly where she was and why she shouldn't be there. Instead, they gave me a bracelet, a number, a room I didn't choose, and somewhere in the building I knew my son was already preparing the next step. They led me down a corridor that felt too quiet for a place meant to help people. The floors were polished to a dull shine, the kind that reflects movement, but not detail, like everything here was designed to blur edges. A nurse with a clipped voice asked me questions while walking, not even looking at me fully. Name, age, any history of episodes, medications. I answered calmly, clearly,
There's
the way I always
there's
had in every office,
the tree
every
house.
bank, every place where being precise mattered. But
Let's
here,
see.
my clarity
Um,
didn't seem to count for much.
and
At the intake
so
desk,
here
they
in
took my
spring,
handbag and
it
emptied it in
puts
front
out
of me.
little tips on
Wallet,
the ends
keys, reading
of it.
glasses,
It's like,
a
yeah,
folded
you know,
shopping
like,
list,
ooh.
even the small tin where I kept cardamom pods, something I carried out
But
of habit more than need.
um,
Everything was
edible.
cataloged, sealed,
Apparently, it
and taken
has more
away.
vitamin C than
You'll get these back
orchids.
upon discharge, the nurse said,
So I
like
was like
discharge was a guaranteed
instantly
destination
like,
and not something that could be
really?
quietly postponed.
You know?
I asked to make a call. Later, she
Yeah, I
replied.
know.
That
Yeah,
word,
yeah, they look at
later,
that.
settled heavily in my chest.
Because
They placed a
there's
plastic
one
band
that's
around my
there at
wrist.
5,
Martha Hale, age
um,
70. A barcode beneath my
where
name.
Mary turns the
I
pump
stared
on.
at it
There's a
longer than I
second
should
one
have.
that's a
It's a
smaller
strange
one.
thing, watching your identity reduced to
And
something
that's the
scannable.
one where
A young orderly escorted
Loki
me
and
further in.
Jasper just kind
Doors
of,
opened with a delay,
they kept
then locked behind us with a soft, final
we left
click.
one branch
That
kind
sound
of
stayed with
low,
me. Not
and
loud,
then
not dramatic,
Loki's up
just
on his little
certain.
tippy
My room was
toes,
small,
trying to
clinical,
get at
too
it.
neat. A narrow bed, a chair
Oh.
bolted to the floor, a
And
window that
then
didn't open
I
more than a
was
few
down
inches.
there when I was
I
down
set
there
my
trying
coat
to
down
trim
slowly,
the
buying myself time to
things of the
think.
lawn
This
there.
was
Like
wrong,
he came up and
entirely wrong.
made
And
face
yet,
at me
everything
and said
around me
like
was
let the
structured in a way that
branch
made it difficult to
down. He
prove it.
was like,
A doctor came in not long after. Mid-40s, composed, with the kind of expression that tried to be neutral but leaned toward cautious.
so
He
yeah,
introduced
and
himself,
so
sat across
you
from me,
know,
and opened a
it's
file.
dark
My
out
file.
still.
Your son is very
It's
concerned, he
cloudy.
said.
It
I
makes
held
it
his
like,
gaze.
you know.
My son is
But
very motivated. That made him
and
pause, just slightly.
we
He
make
began asking
tea
questions.
basically. So
Orientation,
we're making
memory,
tea
mood.
jelly,
I answered all of them without hesitation.
and then
Dates, names,
you can do
sequences.
this
I
with
even corrected him once when he
anything. Like if
misstated
you
something from the
have
report. Again, that
lavender
small flicker crossed his
or
face. Not belief, not yet,
this is the
but
weirdest,
doubt.
most interesting
Do
thing.
you
It's
believe
if you
anyone is
have
trying to harm
like
you? He asked carefully.
um
Yes, I
dried
said.
herbs.
My son is trying to take control of my
We did
assets.
a herbs
There
de
it was. The
Provence,
moment everything tipped. He wrote something down
wine,
immediately.
and it
I could
had
almost
like
see how it looked from the outside.
all kinds of
Elderly
sweet
woman,
herbs in
accusing her
there, and
son,
then a
talking about
rosemary
money,
one.
control, intentions.
Um,
In any other
whatever it
setting,
is,
it would have sounded like a
put
serious
tons of it
claim.
in
In
there,
here,
and
it sounded like
yeah, it does
confirmation.
look like a
I see, he
pond
said.
scum there.
No, I thought. You don't. When he
That's
left, I sat on the edge of the bed and forced myself not to panic. Panic would only feed their version of me. I needed to stay exact, observant,
Yeah,
quiet, when
yeah.
necessary.
I assume he can.
Time
He can
moved
probably
strangely
get
there,
in
measured
within
not
the
in hours
8
but in interruptions. A
So
nurse
you
checking
know,
vitals. Another
he's
patient
getting.
laughing somewhere down the hall.
I'll have
A
to
cart
put
rolling
it down.
past with cups of something warm that smelled faintly of overcooked broth.
So, but yeah,
By
yeah.
evening, I realized something else.
He's like
Victor
blowing
hadn't
it and
come,
stuff.
not to
It's
check
like,
on me,
stop it.
not to make sure I was settled, not even to continue the performance he had started.
But
No, he was waiting,
and anyways,
waiting
yeah,
for the
they
system
have
to
like
do what he needed it to do.
it's
And somewhere,
tons of vitamin C in
outside those
there.
locked doors, there
And
were
so
still
that's
papers,
why I was attracted to
waiting for my
that.
name.
So you're supposed
The
to
first
get the
full day
key out
inside
of
teaches
it,
you how quickly a person can disappear
to
without
make
actually leaving.
whatever it is,
Breakfast arrives on a
and like
plastic tray,
water.
lukewarm
And
oatmeal,
then
a pale slice of toast, something they call
since
tea that tastes like it's
there's
been
no way
introduced to
Mary's
water from
gonna
across the
like
room.
eat that,
No one asks what you
we're gonna
prefer.
go ahead and use the
Preference
lemon.
isn't part of the system.
And
I sit
then
at a small table in the common area, watching more than eating. That becomes
testing
my
and
instinct
everything.
now,
So
watching.
got up a
A
little
man
bit
across from me
early,
stirs his cup
just
long after the
started
sugar
out
has
with some
dissolved.
boiling water.
A woman near the window whispers to herself in a steady rhythm, like she's reciting something important. No one interrupts her. And no one really looks at anyone else. I keep my posture straight, my movements measured. I answer when spoken to, and I don't offer anything extra. Every reaction feels like evidence here. Every word, something that can be turned. A nurse calls my name mid-morning. Vitals. I follow her down the hall, noting the timing, the pattern. Doors open, close, lock. Always that soft click. You're adjusting well, she says, wrapping the cuff around my arm. I shouldn't be adjusting at all, I reply. She gives me a quick glance, not unkind, but practiced. That's what a lot of people say at first. There it is again. That quiet dismissal wrapped in politeness. Back in the common room, I hear my name mentioned at the nurse's station. I don't move, just listen. Son called twice already, asking about evaluation timeline. Keeps mentioning paperwork. Paperwork. The word lands exactly where I expected it to. So he hasn't disappeared. He's working, calling, pushing. Just not where I can see him. I return to my room and sit on the edge of the bed, hands folded in my lap, replaying everything from the morning before they took me. The documents, cream-colored paper, a section flagged with a small adhesive tab. He didn't explain it properly. He avoided specifics. Said it was just a temporary authorization, something about facilitating a transaction, making things smoother. Smoother for who? I close my eyes and reconstruct the moment more carefully. His tone, too controlled. His impatience when I asked to read it fully. The way he reached for a pen before I even agreed. That wasn't a son asking for help. That was a man on a deadline. A knock at my open door pulls me back. Group session in 5, someone says. I nod, stand, and follow the others down the hall. The room we enter is arranged in a circle, chairs evenly spaced, like distance itself is part of the treatment. A facilitator speaks in calm, rounded sentences about expression, safety, trust. Words that feel detached from the reality of locked doors and monitored calls. When it's my turn to speak, I keep it simple. My name is Martha. I'm 70. I don't belong here. A few heads turn. Not surprised. Just curious. Why do you think you're here? The facilitator asks. My son needs something from me, I say. And I refuse to give it. Silence follows. Not dramatic, just heavy. Someone shifts in their chair. Someone else looks away. The facilitator nods slowly, writing something down. Again. Always writing. After the session, as people begin to drift out, a voice beside me speaks quietly. You're not wrong to pay attention to that. I turn. The woman next to me is older, maybe my age, maybe a few years younger. Sharp eyes, stillness in the way she holds herself, like she's conserving energy for something that matters. I'm Beatrice, she says. Martha. She gives a small nod. When someone wants your signature badly enough, they don't always start with the paper. I study her for a moment. No, I reply quietly. Sometimes they start by taking everything else first. For the first time since I arrived, I feel something shift. Not relief, but direction. Beatrice didn't speak much at first, and I respected that. In a place like this, silence can mean many things. Fear, confusion, or simply discipline. With her, it was the last one. We sat near the window during the afternoon break, the weak light cutting across the floor in long, pale strips. She held her tea without drinking it, as if the warmth alone was enough. You were in something legal, I said quietly. She didn't look surprised. Probate, estates. Disputes that turn families into strangers. That sounds familiar, I replied. A faint, almost tired smile crossed her face. It always does. I told her about the papers. Not everything, just enough. The urgency. The way Victor kept insisting it was routine. The fact that he came prepared, with tabs, with explanations too polished to be honest, with a pen already uncapped, like he was sealing something, not asking. Beatrice listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set the cup down carefully. If he needed your signature that badly, she said, then whatever he's trying to move, transfer, or access, it isn't minor. I assumed as much. She glanced toward the hallway, then back at me. And if he couldn't get it willingly, he'd find another way, I finished. She nodded once. The pieces weren't fully clear yet, but the shape of it was becoming impossible to ignore. This wasn't about helping me. It wasn't about concern. It was about access, control, timing. What happens, I asked, if someone here is declared incapable? Beatrice's expression hardened slightly. Then decisions can be made for them, temporarily, sometimes longer. Financial, medical, legal. Depends on how far it goes. And who decides that? Doctors, evaluations, reports. She paused. And sometimes, pressure from very concerned family members. I leaned back slightly, absorbing that. Victor calling, asking about evaluations, about timelines, not visiting me, but working the system around me. Later that afternoon, I was called in again. Another evaluation. Different doctor this time. Younger, more direct, less interested in nuance. Do you feel safe at home? He asked. Yes, I said. Do you trust your son? I let a second pass before answering. No. His pen moved immediately. Why not? Because he's trying to force me to sign documents I don't agree with. And what kind of documents are these? If I knew that clearly, I said, holding his gaze, I wouldn't have refused to sign them without reading. He didn't like that answer. I could see it. It didn't fit neatly into anything he could categorize. You understand, he said carefully, that sometimes family members step in when they're concerned about cognitive decline. I understand, I replied, that sometimes concern is very convenient. Another note, another quiet mark against me. When I returned to the common area, the air felt heavier. Or maybe I was just seeing it differently now. Every conversation between staff, every glance toward a chart, every small decision being made somewhere I couldn't reach. Beatrice was where I left her. Well, she asked. They're building something, I said. Piece by piece. She nodded. Then you do the same. With what? I asked. She looked at me directly now, sharper than before. Memory, consistency, patience, you don't fight this by pushing harder. You outlast it. I sat down beside her, letting that settle in. Outlast it. That meant time. And time, I realized, was the one thing Victor didn't have. Victor came on the third day, just before noon, at the exact hour when the ward felt most disoriented, too late for morning, too early for anything resembling rest. The timing wasn't accidental. It never was with him. They brought me into a small visiting room with glass panels and chairs that were just slightly too low, forcing you into a position that felt weaker than it should. I sat down slowly, adjusting my coat, grounding myself before he entered. When he did, he smiled. Not warmly, not like a son seeing his mother after something distressing. It was the kind of smile meant to reassure anyone watching that everything was under control. Mom? He said gently, closing the door behind him. How are you feeling? I was better in my own house, I replied. He exhaled softly, as if I'd just confirmed something unfortunate, but expected. Then he sat across from me, placing a familiar leather folder on the table between us. The same one. He hadn't even bothered to change it. They're taking good care of you here, he said. I spoke with the doctor. I'm sure you did. There was a brief pause, a recalibration. I know this is confusing, he continued, lowering his voice. But we're trying to make sure everything stays stable. For you, for the house, for the accounts. The accounts. There it was again, dressed up as concern. I don't need stability, I said calmly. I need clarity, and you haven't given me any. His fingers tapped lightly on the folder. Once, twice. That's why I'm here, he said, opening it with careful precision. Inside, several pages, clean, structured. Tabs placed exactly where they needed to be. He slid one sheet forward. Just a temporary authorization, he said. It allows me to manage things while you're recovering. Recovering from what? He didn't answer that directly. Instead, he pushed a pen toward me. If we delay this, there could be complications, deadlines, penalties. I'm trying to prevent that. For yourself? I asked. That was the first crack. Small, almost invisible, but I saw it. His jaw tightened just slightly before he smoothed it over again. For all of us, he said. I didn't touch the pen. Explain it, I said. I already did. No, I replied evenly. You summarized it. Explain it. The room shifted. Not physically, but something in the air changed. The performance was slipping, and he knew it. It's standard, he said, a little sharper now. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Then it should be easy to explain. Silence. Real silence this time. His hand moved to adjust the page, but I noticed something. Just a glimpse, really. A line further down. Smaller text, a name, not his, not mine, a company. I didn't react, not outwardly, but I saw it. That was the first real mistake he made. Mom, he said, leaning forward slightly, lowering his voice even more. You're in a situation where people are already questioning your judgment. Signing this, cooperating, helps everyone see that you're still capable. There it was. Not concern, leverage. If I sign something I don't understand, I said quietly, that would be the first actual sign that I'm not. His eyes held mine for a second longer than necessary. Then the mask dropped, just a fraction. Not anger, not yet. Impatience. You're overthinking this, he said, and you're underestimating me. Another silence. Tighter now. Then he leaned back, closing the folder with more force than needed. Think about it, he said, standing. We don't have much time. We. Not me. Not us. We. As if I were part of something I hadn't agreed to. He picked up the folder, but I noticed he kept one page slightly misaligned before sliding it back in. Careless. Rushed. Desperate. At the door, he paused. They're evaluating you tomorrow again, he said, without turning around. It would help if you were cooperative. Then he left. The door clicked shut behind him. I sat there for a moment, hands still in my lap, breathing evenly, a company name, a deadline, pressure from every direction. And now I knew for certain. This wasn't about taking care of me. This was about finishing something he had already started, and he was running out of time. After Victor left, I didn't return to the common room right away. I stayed
Okay,
seated in that
so
same low chair,
have
letting the
a
silence
tea,
settle properly this time,
basically,
not as something
and the
empty,
spruce
but as
tips.
something useful. Every
Tree
detail from
house.
that meeting replayed itself,
The treehouse
sharper
tree
with
is
each pass.
blooming.
The folder, the pressure, the word
So,
deadline,
I always
and that
wonder,
name I
like,
caught for a
oh
split
man,
second.
why am I
Too
so
structured to be personal,
tired?
too deliberate to
It's
be harmless.
springtime. Oh.
By the time I stood up, I wasn't confused anymore. I was certain. Back
And
in the
then the
ward, the
laurels
rhythm
are
had
all
already
green
resumed,
too,
as
and
if
then
nothing
the
had
top of
happened.
the car is
A cart
yellow, and
rolled
it's just
past
like,
with lunch trays, overcooked rice, something resembling
so,
stewed
and
vegetables,
so
and a faint smell of turmeric that didn't quite
Yuri
belong.
kryptonite, we're doing it over
I took a
here.
tray out of
Like,
habit,
have
sat down,
everything
and
all
barely
wiped
touched it.
down quick before
Beatrice noticed.
things happen
He
every day.
came, she said
And then I
quietly.
had lemons
Yes.
left
And?
from,
He's running out of time, I
I had
replied.
like this
That got her
massive
full
bag of
attention.
lemons, but
I kept my voice
could
low.
use.
There's a
Okay,
company involved,
now
not
we're
just accounts,
lemon
not
free.
just household matters, something bigger.
Household.
He slipped. Beatrice leaned back slightly,
So,
studying
okay,
me.
so
Then it's not maintenance, it's transfer.
according
That's what
to
I'm thinking.
and
And if it's tied to a
this
deadline,
particular
she added,
tree,
then someone else is waiting on the other side of that signature.
in Alaska,
Exactly.
they have like
Investors, buyers, partners,
recipes for
people who
what
had no
works. So
idea or didn't
we
care
asked, can
how
our
that signature was being
recipes
obtained.
canning,
I need to make a call, I said.
with
Beatrice gave a small, knowing look.
EDU,
Then
the
you need to do it the
extension
right
there,
way.
and the college.
Calm, clear, no
And
urgency in your voice. Urgency
if
here
it's
works
wild
against you.
foraged,
She was right.
uh,
Everything here twisted urgency into
there's
instability.
not
Later that afternoon, I approached the
a
nurse's
set
station.
number
Same tone,
of
same posture.
you have to add this many cups
No
of
sharp
this
edges.
and that many
I'd like to
tea
request a
and
supervised call,
that,
I said.
and,
The nurse on duty glanced at my chart.
um,
To who? My attorney.
because like
That made her
with
pause.
blueberries
Not
or
suspicion,
strawberries,
interest.
you're
I'll note it,
pretty
she said.
much certain
It may take some
that
time.
if you just
Of
go
course,
to the
I replied.
store
Later.
in
Always later. But this time, I didn't let that word
Georgia,
sink into me the
go
same
to
way,
the store
because now I
in
understood something
California,
else.
you probably the
Victor was also
strawberries you
dealing with
get out of
later,
the
and his
store
version of later was far more
are
dangerous.
gonna be
Evening came with another
really
evaluation.
similar, and so if
Same
you
questions,
follow
slightly rearranged.
this
I answered them with the
particular
same precision.
recipe,
No
you're
contradictions.
pretty much
No emotional
guaranteed
spikes.
it'll come
Just
out,
consistency.
you know,
At one point,
kind
the
of
doctor
deal.
looked up from his
And
notes.
so that's what
You're
that
very
whole,
composed, he
you
said.
know,
I've had practice,
home
I replied.
preservation
With what?
thing is like,
Being underestimated. That lingered
it's,
longer than he
work.
expected.
So,
When I
so
returned to my
since
room, I
this
noticed
is
something
the same
new.
thing as the
My door wasn't fully
Thimbleberries
open,
and the
just slightly off from where I
Sandberries
had
and,
left it, a detail most people would ignore. I didn't.
Alaska, you know, State
Inside, everything
University
looked the same.
Extension,
Bed, chair,
they
coat, but the air felt
hazard
disturbed.
a guess.
I stepped in
You
slowly,
know,
scanning without moving my head too
good
much.
deal.
Then I saw it, my coat
And
pocket,
so
folded
we're
differently.
gonna go with
I
their
crossed the room and
hazard.
slipped my hand inside. Empty. Of course it was empty.
So,
They had
yeah,
taken everything
also
already,
a little less
but that wasn't the
sugar, so
point.
we're just gonna
Someone had checked, not for
go
belongings,
with that.
for something
There
else,
we go.
something they expected me to have. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, letting that realization settle.
If there's any
Victor
fines
wasn't
with
just waiting
bullets,
outside. He was pushing from every direction. Calls,
here's your
evaluations,
50 cent worth
pressure,
for the day's purple
and now,
bullets.
checking, which meant
Pollen, I'm
one
pretty
thing.
sure it's pollen.
He wasn't just trying to win. He was trying to make sure I had no way to stop him.
And
I
it's-
leaned back
and it
slightly,
smells
eyes on the ceiling,
like
breathing
lemons
steady.
to start,
That
and
was
so
his
then we're
mistake.
adding more lemons
Because the
to it,
moment
and
someone
so
starts checking that carefully, it means they're afraid of what you might already know.
smell like lemon and
The ward
Christmas
began to
tree.
change once I stopped reacting to it. Not physically. Nothing here ever really changed. but my place inside it did. I was no longer trying to convince anyone I didn't belong. That was a losing approach. Instead, I let them observe exactly what they expected to see: calm, cooperative, contained. And while they watched that version of me, I paid attention to everything else: patterns, timing, gaps. The nurse from the previous day, the one who didn't dismiss me entirely, was back on shift that morning. Her name tag read Elise, slightly worn at the edges. She didn't speak differently, didn't act differently, but there was a subtle shift in how long she lingered near me, how her eyes stayed just a second longer than necessary. That second mattered. During vitals, she wrapped the cuff around my arm and said quietly, without looking at me, "You've had a lot of calls logged." I didn't react immediately. "Have I?" "Family," she said. "Persistent. Victor, of course." "Does he ask about me?" I asked. A small pause. Then, "He asks about your status." "Not me. My status." "And what do they tell him?" "That depends on the notes." I let that sit. "Do the notes match what you see?" I asked. That was the first time she looked directly at me. "Sometimes," she said. Then she removed the cuff and moved on. Not confirmation, but not denial either. Later, in the common area, I noticed something else. A clipboard left briefly unattended near the station. Not mine, but close enough to matter. I didn't move toward it, didn't even turn my head fully, just watched from the edge of my vision. A name, a line, a word circled. Cooperative. That was what they were writing about me now. Good. Let them. Beatrice sat across from me, slowly stirring her tea again. "You've shifted," she said. "So have they," I replied. She gave a faint nod. "That's how you know you're doing it right." I leaned slightly closer. "He's calling constantly, asking about evaluations, about notes." "Then he's not certain," she said. "If he were, he wouldn't need to check." "And if he's not certain," I continued, "then something isn't fully under his control yet." Exactly. That word settled deep. Not fully. Meaning there was still space. That afternoon, I was finally granted the call. Supervised, of course. Timed. Controlled. They led me into a small room with a mounted phone and a chair bolted to the floor, just like the others. The nurse stood near the door, present, but pretending not to listen. I dialed from memory, every digit deliberate. It rang longer than I liked. Then, "Marlowe and Finch." Relief didn't show on my face, but it moved through me all the same. "This is Martha Hale," I said evenly. "I need to speak with Daniel Finch." A pause. "Please hold." Seconds stretched, then a different voice. Familiar. Grounded. "Martha?" "Yes." Another pause, but not confusion. Recognition. "I've been trying to reach you." "I know," I said. "Listen carefully. I'm currently under psychiatric hold." "It was initiated by my son. I am not incapacitated. I repeat, I am not incapacitated." Silence on the line. Not disbelief. Calculation. "I understand," he said slowly. "Can you speak freely?" "No. So I'll be precise." I glanced once toward the nurse, still watching, still neutral. "My son attempted to have me sign documents 2 days ago. I refused. I believe those documents involve a transfer connected to a third-party entity, possibly time-sensitive." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "Do not sign anything," he said quietly. "I won't." "And Martha?" "Yes?" "Nothing has been authorized. Not yet." "Not yet." The same phrase from a different direction. That was all I needed. "I'll handle the rest," he added. "I expect you will." I hung up before anything else could be said. When I stood, my legs felt steady. More than steady. Aligned. Back in the corridor, the doors clicked open and closed behind me again, that same soft certainty echoing through the space. But it didn't feel the same anymore, because now I knew something Victor didn't. He thought he was close. He thought the system was almost done shaping things in his favor. But the truth was, he hadn't secured the one thing he actually needed. And time? Time was no longer just his problem. It was about to become mine. After the call, something inside me settled into place. Not relief, not comfort, but structure. Before, everything had felt like reaction. Now it felt like sequence. There was a direction to follow, and more importantly, there were limits to what Victor could still do. Not yet. That phrase stayed with me. It meant he was close, but not finished. And that gap was where I existed. The ward moved as it always did, slow and controlled, but I began noticing the edges more clearly. Staff rotations, shift changes, the exact window when calls were more likely to be approved. Even the way certain nurses spoke differently depending on who was listening. It wasn't chaos. It was a system, and systems, if you watched long enough, revealed their weak points. That evening, during a quieter stretch, I found Beatrice near the window again. The light was already fading, turning the glass into more of a mirror than an exit. "Well?" she asked. "He hasn't secured it," I said. Her eyes sharpened slightly. "You're sure?" My attorney confirmed it. Nothing has been authorized. Whatever he's trying to push, it's still incomplete. Beatrice let out a slow breath. Then he's under pressure from the other side. That's what I thought. And pressure makes people careless. I gave a small nod. He already has been. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us tracing the same invisible outline of what was happening outside those walls. "There's someone else," I said finally. "There has to be. A company, a deal, something that requires speed. He wouldn't do this alone. Not like this." "No," Beatrice agreed. "People don't build traps like this unless there's something waiting at the end of it." Exactly. Something waiting. The next morning, I was called again. This time not for evaluation, but for another supervised call. Unexpected. "Family," the nurse said. I knew immediately who it wasn't. They led me into the same room, same chair, same mounted phone. I picked it up. "Hello?" A small pause. Then, "Grandma?" "June." My grip tightened slightly, but my voice stayed even. "Hello, darling. I didn't know where you were," she said quickly. "Dad said you needed rest, that you were overwhelmed, but something didn't feel right." Of course it didn't. "Listen carefully," I said. "I'm all right, but I need you to tell me what's been happening at home." There was a hesitation. Not fear, uncertainty. "He's been busy," she said. "A lot of calls, meetings. He's barely sleeping. And yesterday, he had people over, not friends. Business people. I've never seen them before." My eyes shifted slightly toward the nurse, still watching, still silent. "Did you hear anything?" I asked. "Just bits," June said. "Something about closing and timing, and one of them kept asking if she had signed yet." There it was, not subtle anymore. "Did he say anything about me?" I asked. Another pause. "He said you weren't in a state to make decisions right now," she said quietly. "That it was temporary, that everything would be handled soon." Handled. Such a clean word for something so ugly. "June," I said, my voice steady but firmer now. "Has he been in my study?" "Yes," she said immediately. "He cleared a lot of things out. Papers. That old metal box you keep locked. He took that too." The dispatch box. Of course he did.
sugar in that
Did he open it?
takes like
I think so.
batch and a half.
I heard him on the phone later saying something like, "It's all there. We just need the final authorization."
Probably be okay
Final
with
authorization. Everything was aligning.
one
"Listen to me," I said. "Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. And if anyone asks you questions about me, be careful how you answer." "I will," she said quickly.
because, like,
"Grandma,
you know,
what's going on?"
okay,
I
we
let a
had
small
to
breath
do a
out.
batch
"The
before
truth,"
because
I
of
said
this.
quietly,
We had
"is
one
catching up."
because of that.
Silence on the
So
line.
now I have
Then
my
softly,
little,
"Okay."
anxiety
That was enough.
checklist,
When the
like,
call ended,
okay,
I placed the receiver back slowly, deliberately. The room felt smaller now, but clearer.
it should
Victor
work.
wasn't just trying to secure my signature. He had already built everything around it: meetings, promises, expectations,
Should.
people waiting,
That's a big
and
yes.
all of it balanced on something he didn't have: me.
Alright.
As they led me back down the corridor, the familiar clicks echoed again. But this time, they didn't feel like barriers. They felt like time markers. Because somewhere outside, the pressure was rising. And the closer it got to breaking, the more dangerous Victor was going to become. By the 9th day, the ward no longer felt like a place I had been taken to. It felt like a place I had been placed inside, very deliberately, while something else was happening beyond it. And now, finally, I could see the outline of that something clearly. Morning came with a dull gray light and the faint smell of something sweet in the air. Someone had managed to bring in halva from outside, and it lingered strangely against the sterile walls. Small details like that used to feel comforting. Now they just reminded me that life was continuing elsewhere, untouched by what was being done to me. I sat across from Beatrice again, both of us quieter than usual. "He's accelerating," I said. She nodded. "He has to. June told me about the meetings, multiple people, asking if I've signed." "That means money is already in motion," Beatrice replied. "Or promised." "Promised without having it secured," I added. "Which is worse." "Yes, much worse." I leaned slightly closer, lowering my voice. "There's more." He took the dispatch box from my study. That made her pause. "Locked?" she asked. "Yes." "And he opened it?" "June thinks so." Beatrice exhaled slowly. "Then he has documents he shouldn't have. Historical ones, possibly trust-related." "That's what I was thinking. And if he's combining those with whatever he's trying to get you to sign now," she trailed off. "He's building something that looks legitimate," I finished. "Exactly." We sat with that for a moment. A structure built from pieces that didn't belong together. Old documents, new authorization, pressure, timing. It wasn't just manipulation anymore. It was construction. Later that day, I was called in again. But this time, something felt different before I even entered the room. The doctor was already seated. Not the younger one, the first one, the cautious one. He didn't start with questions right away. Instead, he looked at me for a moment longer than before, as if recalibrating something in his own mind. "How are you feeling today, Mrs. Hale?" he asked. "Consistent," I said. A faint shift in his expression. "That's a good word," he replied. "It's an accurate one." He glanced down at the file, flipping through a few pages. I noticed more notes than before, more handwriting, more revisions. "They've told me you've been cooperative," he said. "I've been precise." He looked back up. "There's a difference?" "Yes," I said. "Cooperation suggests agreement. Precision suggests clarity." That stayed with him. I could see it. "And you feel you've been clear?" he asked. I've been the same person every time you've spoken to me, I said calmly. The version of me in that file seems to change depending on who's writing. Silence. Not uncomfortable, just deliberate. Your son is very involved, he said after a moment. I'm aware. He's expressed concern about your decision-making. I've expressed concern about his intentions. Another note, but slower this time, more careful. I leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, just enough to shift the space between us. May I ask you something? I said. He hesitated briefly, then nodded. If a person refuses to sign a document they don't fully understand, I said, would you consider that a sign of instability? He didn't answer immediately. Good. That meant he was thinking. Not necessarily, he said finally. And if the same person is then brought here, and within hours, the same document is presented again under different circumstances, would that raise any questions for you? Now the silence was different. He closed the file. Slowly. Yes, he said. There it was. Not belief, but doubt, pointed in the right direction. I'm not asking you to take my side, I continued. I'm asking you to observe the pattern. He studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod. I will, he said. When I left that room, something had shifted again. Not in the ward, in the balance. Victor had been building pressure from the outside, pushing, calling, positioning. But now, there was pressure forming on the inside too. And pressure, when it comes from both directions, doesn't hold. It cracks. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and let that settle fully. He had the documents, he had the meetings, he had the expectation, but he didn't have the one thing holding it all together. And now, he was starting to lose control of the environment he thought he owned, which meant the next move wouldn't be careful. It would be desperate. And desperate people make mistakes you can finally use. They brought him in earlier this time. Not during the loose, disoriented middle of the day, but in the morning when everything felt sharper, more observed. That alone told me something had changed. Either he had pushed for it, or someone had allowed it. When I entered the room, Victor was already there, standing, not sitting. That was new. The leather folder was on the table again, but this time it wasn't placed neatly. It was angled, slightly open, like he had been going through it more than once before I arrived. Impatience had replaced precision. Good. I sat down slowly, taking my time, adjusting my sleeve as if none of this mattered. You look well, he said. You look tired, I replied. That landed. A small thing, but it broke his rhythm. I've been dealing with a lot, he said, sitting down, finally. For you? No, I said calmly. Around me. Silence. He didn't smile this time. He opened the folder immediately, skipping the performance entirely. We don't have much time left, he said. I need you to understand that. I understand more than you think. I doubt that, he snapped, sharper now. Then he caught himself, exhaled, lowered his voice again. Mom, listen. There are people involved now, serious people. This isn't something you can just stall indefinitely. There it was, not hidden anymore. Then you shouldn't have built it on something you didn't have, I said. His eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, the room felt smaller. You don't know what you're talking about, he said quietly. I know you've already promised something that isn't yours to give. That hit. Harder than anything before. I saw it. The exact second where calculation gave way to exposure. His jaw tightened. His fingers pressed against the edge of the table just a little too firmly. "You're being manipulated," he said. "People are filling your head with things that aren't real." "Then explain it," I said again. "Properly. Start from the beginning. What is the company? What is the transfer? Who's waiting?" He didn't answer, because he couldn't, not without confirming everything. Instead, he pushed the paper toward me again, more forcefully this time. "Just sign it," he said, "and this all goes away." "No," I replied, not louder, just final. That's when it shifted. Completely. He leaned forward, closer than before, his voice dropping. Not calm, not controlled anymore, but tight, strained. "If you don't sign this," he said, "you're not leaving here anytime soon." There it was. The truth. Unfiltered. Hanging in the air between us. I didn't react immediately. That was important. I let it sit. Let it exist. Then I spoke. "So that's the plan," I said quietly. "Not help. Not concern. Just pressure until I break." "You're already here," he said. "Do you really think anyone's going to take your side if you start making accusations?" "They already are," I replied. That stopped him. Just for a second. "Enough. You've been calling," I continued. "Pushing for evaluations. Asking about notes. That's not concern. That's monitoring." His expression darkened. "And you've been busy outside," I added. "Meetings? Promises? Telling people everything will be handled soon." He didn't speak now, because now he knew I knew. "Tell me something, Victor," I said, leaning slightly closer, my voice still calm, still even. "What happens when they find out you built all of this on something you couldn't secure?" Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. His breathing changed. Slightly faster. Not panic. Not yet. But close. I'm watching this moment, and I can feel the air in that room turn sharp. He's not pretending anymore, and she's not backing down. If you were Martha right here, facing your own child like this, would you keep pushing, or would you protect yourself and stay quiet? Tell me honestly. He leaned back slowly, picking up the folder. But this time, there was no care in the movement. The papers shifted unevenly. "You're making a mistake," he said. "No," I replied. "You already did." He stood, this time faster. "You don't understand what's at stake," he said. "I understand exactly what's at stake," I said. "That's why I'm not signing." For a moment, it looked like he might say something else, something real, something uncontrolled. But he didn't. Instead, he turned, walked to the door, and stopped just before opening it. "This isn't over," he said without looking back. "No," I agreed quietly. "It's not." The door opened, then closed. And just like that, whatever balance had existed before was gone. This wasn't pressure anymore. This was collapse beginning. And now, he didn't just need my signature. He needed a way out. After that meeting, the ward didn't feel controlled anymore. It felt tense. Subtly, quietly tense. Like something had shifted behind the scenes. Something not written in charts or spoken in those careful, rounded sentences. You could see it in how the staff moved. Slightly faster. Slightly more aware. Conversations cut shorter when I approached. Doors closing just a fraction quicker. Victor hadn't just lost ground. He had made noise doing it. And noise draws attention. That morning, I noticed Elise again. Same routine. Same measured tone. But when she checked my vitals, her hands paused for half a second longer than usual. "Busy yesterday," she said under her breath. "Yes," I replied. Another small pause. Not all of it was expected. That was as close as she could come, but it was enough. Something had reached them. Not the full truth, but enough to disrupt the version Victor had been feeding into the system. Back in the common area, Beatrice was already watching me. "He pushed too far," she said quietly. "Yes. And? And now they're looking closer." She nodded once. "Good. That's when things start unraveling." But unraveling doesn't happen all at once. It starts with threads. Late morning, I was called again. Not for evaluation this time, but for a brief meeting with administration. That alone was unusual. They didn't explain why. They didn't need to. I walked in steady. Inside, there were two people this time. Not just a doctor. A second presence. Paperwork on the table, but not the kind Victor brought. This was internal, structured, careful. "Mrs. Hale," the doctor said, "we'd like to clarify a few things." "Of course," I replied. Different tone now. Less assumption, more verification. They asked about the timeline again, but this time, they listened differently. Not waiting for confirmation of instability, but checking for consistency. I gave them the same answers. Exact. Unchanged. The same refusal to sign. The same pressure. The same sequence. No variation. No cracks. At one point, the second person, quiet until now, spoke. "Your son mentioned that you've been experiencing confusion regarding financial matters." I looked directly at him. "No," I said. "I've been experiencing pressure regarding financial matters." That distinction stayed in the room. You could feel it. He wrote something down, slowly, carefully. When I left, I knew. Victor's narrative wasn't holding cleanly anymore. Not broken yet, but no longer smooth. That afternoon, the next piece arrived. Unexpected. A nurse approached me near the window. "You have another call," she said. Not scheduled, not requested. I followed her. Same room, same phone. But this time, I already knew something had changed. I picked up. "Martha," Daniel Finch's voice came through lower than before, tighter. "I'm here," I said. "We've identified the entity," he said. "The company tied to the document." Silence on my end, not surprise. Confirmation. "And?" I asked. "It's worse than expected." Of course it was. "It's a holding structure connected to a failing development group," he continued. "Your son has already leveraged assets he doesn't legally control. He's promised access to property tied to your late husband's trust." There it was, fully formed, not suspicion anymore. Fact. "And the deadline?" I asked. "Imminent," he said. "Days, not weeks. Possibly hours, depending on the agreement." That explained everything. The pressure, the speed, the desperation. "He needed your signature to finalize authority," Daniel added. "Without it, the entire structure collapses. And if it collapses, he's exposed," I finished. "Yes." I let that settle. Then asked the only question that mattered now. "What has he already signed?" A pause. "Too much," Daniel said, "but not enough to complete it." Again, that line, "not enough." "Then we hold," I said. "Yes," he replied. "And Martha?" "Yes." "He's not just at risk financially. If this comes apart the wrong way, there could be legal consequences." Of course there could. Because this was no longer just manipulation. It was liability. Real. Documented. Traceable. "I understand," I said. When the call ended, I placed the receiver down slowly. Everything was clear now. Victor hadn't just made a bad decision. He had built something unsustainable and used me as the final piece to stabilize it. Without me, it wouldn't just fail. it would collapse. Completely. Back in the corridor, the familiar clicks followed me again. But now they sounded different. Not like something closing, like something counting down. Because somewhere outside, meetings were still happening. Promises were still being held together. People were still waiting. But time? Time was nearly gone. And Victor was standing right at the edge of everything he had built, without the one thing that could save it. By the 12th day, everything was moving faster, but not in the way Victor had planned. The pressure hadn't disappeared. It had shifted. And now it wasn't pressing only on me. It was pressing on him. The ward felt sharper that morning. Not louder, not chaotic, just alert. Like the people inside it had started paying attention to details they previously ignored. Conversations between staff were shorter, more direct, less scripted. And when they looked at me now, they weren't just observing. They were assessing. That mattered. I was called in again, but this time there was no attempt to make it feel routine. The same doctor, the same second man, but something had changed in how they held themselves. Less authority, more caution. Mrs. Hale, the doctor began, we've reviewed your case more thoroughly. I would hope so, I replied calmly. A slight pause, not irritation. Adjustment. We'd like to revisit your admission circumstances, he continued. Of course. They asked again, but now the questions were different. Not, how do you feel? Not, what do you believe? But, what happened first? Who initiated contact? What exactly were you asked to sign? Sequence, structure, verification. I gave them everything, clean, linear, unchanged. Victor's visit, the papers, the refusal, the police, the timing. No emotion layered over it, just fact. At one point, the second man leaned forward slightly. Your son stated that you were disoriented prior to his call. I was in my kitchen, I said, preparing tea. I can tell you exactly what was on the counter, where everything was placed and what time he arrived. Silence, not skepticism, consideration. Would you like me to? I added. He shook his head slowly. No, that won't be necessary. Of course it wouldn't, because disorientation doesn't come with that level of detail. The doctor closed the file, not abruptly, deliberately. We are reassessing your hold, he said. There it was. Not a promise, but a fracture. I understand, I replied. When I left that room, the corridor felt different again. Not because anything had changed physically, but because something had shifted in authority. Victor no longer controlled the narrative completely. And once that happens, everything starts to slip. Back in the common area, Beatrice looked at me once and already knew. They're pulling back, she said. Yes. How far? Not enough yet, I replied. But they're no longer moving in one direction. She nodded slowly. That's when people start protecting themselves. Exactly. Doctors, administrators, staff. Once doubt enters, no one wants to be the one who missed something obvious. No one wants their name attached to the wrong version of events. That afternoon, the next crack appeared. Elise approached me again, but this time, she didn't hide it behind routine. They're reviewing your discharge status, she said quietly. I didn't react outwardly. When? I asked. Soon, she said. Very soon. That word carried weight now. Not like before, not delayed, imminent. I gave a small nod. Thank you. She hesitated for a second, then added, even quieter, he's been calling more. Of course he had. More urgently, she continued. That confirmed it. He knew, not everything, but enough. Enough to feel the ground shifting under him, enough to realize the system he had been using was no longer stable. That evening, something else happened. No visit, no meeting, no direct contact, but a message. Indirect, carried through staff. He called, Elise said, asked if you'd reconsider signing, if the documents were brought again. I almost smiled. Almost. Did he? I said. Yes. And what did you tell him? That it wasn't my decision. Good. Because now, it wouldn't be his either. I sat by the window as the light faded, the glass reflecting more of the room than the outside. Somewhere beyond those walls, Victor was still trying to hold everything together. Calls, promises, deadlines closing in. Lines?
Alright.
But the structure he built was already breaking, and he knew it. Because now, he wasn't just pushing, he was asking. And that meant one thing: he had no moves left. Only pressure. And pressure was no longer enough. I was released on the 13th day. Not with ceremony, not with apology. Just a quiet shift in tone, a different kind of paperwork, and a sentence that tried to sound neutral. We've determined that you no longer meet the criteria for involuntary hold. No longer. As if I ever had. I stood there, coat in my hands, watching them move around me with professional calm. No one mentioned Victor. No one mentioned the report that brought me in. The system doesn't correct itself out loud. It simply adjusts and moves on. But I didn't move on. Not yet. They returned my belongings one by one. My handbag, my glasses, my keys, even the small tin of cardamom still sealed as if nothing had happened. I held it for a moment longer than necessary, proof of continuity. Proof that I was still myself. At the exit, the final door opened with that same soft click, but this time, it didn't close behind me the same way. Because this time, I walked out. The air outside felt sharper than I remembered. Not colder, clearer. The kind of clarity you only notice after being somewhere controlled for too long. And I didn't hesitate. I didn't go home. I didn't call Victor. I didn't sit and process anything. I went straight to the bank. The building stood exactly as it always had. Glass, steel, quiet authority. Inside, everything was orderly, predictable, untouched by the kind of chaos that had just tried to swallow me. Good. I stepped up to the desk. I need to speak with Mr. Ellison, I said. There was a brief pause, a glance at the system, then a nod. Of course, Mrs. Hale. No confusion, no hesitation, no sign that I was anything other than exactly who I said I was. That mattered more than anything. A few minutes later, I was seated across from him in a private office. Martha, he said, leaning forward slightly. We've been trying to reach you. I know, I replied. And now I'm here. I didn't waste time. My son has attempted to initiate a transfer of authority over assets tied to my name, I said. That authorization does not exist. It has not been granted, and it will not be granted. His expression tightened slightly, not in doubt, but in recognition. We suspected irregular activity, he said. There were inquiries, urgent ones. From him, I said. Yes. I nodded once. That ends now. He turned his screen slightly, pulling up records. Nothing has been finalized, he confirmed. But there have been attempts to position documents for rapid execution. Freeze everything, I said. All movement, all pending authorizations, anything connected to my name or my late husband's trust. He didn't argue, didn't question, just nodded. It will be done immediately. Good. That was the first piece. Then came the second. My attorney will be in contact with you, I added. We'll be restructuring access and authority. Permanently. Another nod. Understood. When I stood up to leave, there was no hesitation in my step. No doubt. No second guessing. Because for the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting. I was moving. Outside, I paused for a moment. Just one. Then I reached into my bag and took out my phone. Missed calls. Dozens. All from Victor. Of course. I didn't call him back. Not yet. Instead, I made a different call. Daniel, I said when he answered. It's done. The bank is secured. A brief silence. Then, good, he said. Then we moved to the next step. I looked ahead, steady. Yes, I replied. Now we do. Because Victor had spent days building pressure, control, urgency. He thought he was closing in. He thought he was one step away. But now, everything he built was exposed. And for the first time, he wasn't the one in control of what happened next. I was. I didn't go home until everything that mattered was no longer within Victor's reach. That was the rule now. Not emotion, not confrontation. Structure. By the time I stepped back into my house, it no longer felt like a place I had left. It felt like a place that had been used. The front door opened too easily. The air inside was stale in a way that didn't come from time. It came from movement. Things had been touched, shifted, not violently, carefully. That made it worse. I walked in slowly, closing the door behind me with deliberate quiet. The kitchen looked almost the same. The ceramic jar of saffron still where I left it. The lemon gone. The chair slightly angled differently. He had been here. Of course he had. I moved toward my study. The drawer was open now. Not slightly. Fully. Inside, the space where the dispatch box had been was empty, just as June had said. But there were other details. Files moved, papers no longer aligned, tabs that I would never have used placed where they didn't belong. He hadn't just taken things. He had gone through everything, systematically. I stepped further in, scanning without rushing. On the desk, a single page had been left behind, not by accident. A copy. He wanted me to see it. I picked it up. There it was again. The same structure, the same language, but now I could read it without interruption, without pressure. Authorization. Transfer of decision-making authority. Temporary, written in a way that made it sound harmless, but buried deeper. Control. Not assistance, not support. Control. And at the bottom, partially visible through the paper beneath it, the same company name I had glimpsed before, now clear, now undeniable. I set it down carefully. No anger, no shock. Just confirmation. He had been preparing for the moment I broke. He just hadn't expected me not to. My phone buzzed. Victor. Again. This time, I answered. Silence on the line for a second. Then, Mom. Different tone. No calm, no performance. Just strain. I'm out, I said. I know, he replied immediately. I heard. Of course he had. You shouldn't have gone to the bank, he added. There it was. Not concern. Reaction. I should have gone sooner, I said. A sharp breath on the other end. You don't understand what you've done, he said. No, I replied evenly. You don't understand what you started. Silence. Then, you've just destroyed everything, he said. Everything you built on something that wasn't yours, I corrected. His voice dropped lower. Dangerous now. There are people involved, Mom. Serious people. You think this just disappears because you froze an account? I think, I said calmly. that people who were promised something they can't legally receive tend to ask very direct questions. Another silence. Longer. Tighter. "You're going to regret this," he said. "No," I replied. "You are." He let out something between a breath and a laugh. "This isn't over." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm not stopping." That was the moment. The exact moment where he realized this wasn't going to resolve quietly. This wasn't going to be fixed with pressure, or guilt, or urgency. Because now, everything he had done existed outside of him, in records, in calls, in witnesses, in people already waiting. "You could have just signed," he said. "Quieter now. Not anger, not control. Something closer to frustration. It would have been easier." "For you," I said. Another pause. Then softer. "You don't even know how bad this is." I looked around my study, at the empty space where the box had been, at the papers he had touched, moved, tried to reshape into something usable. "I know exactly how bad it is," I said. And then I ended the call. No hesitation. No final words. Just silence. Because there was nothing left to discuss. Only consequences. I stood there for a moment longer, then reached for the desk drawer and closed it fully this time. Not the way he left it. The way it should be. Controlled. Final. Outside, the light was already beginning to fade. And somewhere, Victor was no longer negotiating. He was explaining. To people who don't accept delays. To people who don't accept excuses. To people who had been promised something. He could no longer deliver. Victor didn't call again that night. Not because he didn't want to. Because he couldn't afford to. By the next morning, everything he had been holding together started coming apart. Not loudly, not all at once, but in the way structures fail when they were never stable to begin with. One piece gives, then another, and suddenly, nothing connects the way it used to. Daniel called early. "They've started asking questions," he said without introduction. "Which ones?" I asked. "All the right ones," he replied. "Authority, documentation, timeline. And most importantly, why access was promised before it was secured." I closed my eyes for a second. Not from stress, from recognition. "That's enough," I said. "Yes," he agreed. "More than enough." There was a brief pause. "He's trying to stall," Daniel added, "saying there were delays on your end, that you were unavailable." "Unavailable," I repeated. A clean word. Convenient. "And when that stops working?" I asked. Another pause. "He won't be able to answer what comes next." Exactly. Because the next question is always the same. Why? Why was the authorization not in place? Why was control assumed? Why was pressure applied? And once those questions are asked in the right room, there are no clean answers left. Later that day, I saw it for myself. Not directly, but clearly enough. I was in my study when June came in, her face pale but steady. "He's in trouble," she said. "I know," I replied. "They came to the house this morning. Not police, but people. Asking about you, about the trust, about documents." I nodded slowly. "Did you speak to them?" "No," she said quickly. "I told them to contact your attorney." "Good." She hesitated. Then, "He didn't expect this," she said. "No," I replied. "He expected me to sign." Silence filled the room. Then she asked the question that had been waiting. "Are you going to help him?" I looked at her. Really looked. At the way she stood. Not afraid, not confused, just aware. "No," I said. Not cold, not emotional. Just final. because help at this point wouldn't be help. It would be continuation. And I was done continuing something that should never have started. That evening, Victor came to the house. Not announced. Not invited. I heard the door open, then his steps, faster than usual, heavier. He stopped in the doorway of the study. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked different, not composed, not controlled, worn. "You could still fix this," he said finally. I didn't move. "No," I replied. "You can't." His jaw tightened. "They're going to tear this apart," he said. "Everything. Do you understand that?" "Yes," I said. "And you're just going to let that happen?" "I didn't build it," I replied. Silence. Then, "I did this for us," he said. "No," I said quietly. "You did this for yourself and called it us." That was the last mask. Gone. He stepped further into the room. "They'll come after everything," he said. "Reputation, assets, legal exposure. You think you're untouched by this?" "I made sure I am," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, almost under his breath, "I just needed your signature." I looked at him. 70 years of life behind me. Every decision, every moment, every lesson, all of it distilled into one simple truth. "And I needed to know why you were willing to do this to me to get it," I said. He didn't answer, because now there was nothing left to say. He stood there for a moment longer, then turned and left. No slam, no final words. Just the sound of the door closing behind him. And this time, it didn't feel like something ending suddenly. It felt like something finishing exactly the way it was always going to. I've been thinking about this story, and I'll tell you honestly, I don't know if I would have had Martha's strength. Maybe I would have given in just to stop the pressure. Or maybe I would have done exactly what she did. What about you? Was she right to stand her ground? Or should she have chosen differently? Tell me in the comments. And if you've ever seen something like this happen, don't forget to subscribe and share your story.